In this video, we'll be learning how to divide polynomials using the long division method. When you're dividing by a monomial, it's easier because if there's just one term on the bottom, you can separate the problem into different fractions and then divide by that denominator. And then just remember when you're dividing, you subtract exponents. Today, though, our focus is on long division. So when you're dividing a polynomial by polynomial, it's not as simple as just separating it into different fractions. One method that's used is the long division pattern. Now, you've done long division before when you were younger. Here I'm going to use the example of 65 divided by 4. And we're going to be using the same steps you used for that long division, just now you have variables. So when you do 65 divided by 4, usually you divide the first terms. So what I mean by that is you're going to do 6 divided by 4, which comes out to 1. Your next step would be then to multiply. So here we did 6 divided by 4, and we got 1. And we wrote that in our answer. Then our next step is to multiply. So we take that 1 and multiply it by 4. That gives us 4. Our next step is to subtract. When you subtract, you need to remember to change the sign to ensure that you're subtracting. So here I change it to a minus 4, and I get 2. My next step is to bring down that 5, and then I repeat. So next I would do 25 divided by 4, which is 6. 6 times 4 is 24. When I subtract that, I get 1. Since there's nothing left to bring down here, 1 would be my remainder, and I'm done dividing. Your remainder usually gets written back in your answer. So here I'm going to put a positive 1, and you write it as a fraction. Your denominator is the number you were dividing by in the first place. So my answer would be 16 1/4. So anytime we get a remainder, we need to make sure to include that in our answer. Here on this next problem, we're going to divide 2x squared minus 5x minus 3 by x minus 3. When you do this, you start by dividing your first term. So I'm going to divide 2x squared by x. Remember, when you divide, you subtract exponents. So here I get 2x to the first power. I can leave that one imaginary. This is going to be part of my answer. So I'm going to take that 2x and I'm going to write that on top of my long division. Your next step is to take that 2x and multiply it here by this x minus 3. So we use this when we multiply. So I get 2x squared minus 6x. Our next step is to subtract. So I'm going to take that 2x squared minus 6x. But if you're subtracting, remember you're changing the signs. So I'm going to write it here as negative 2x squared and positive 6x. These cancel. Negative 5 plus 6 is 1x. Once you've done this step, you're ready to bring down this minus 3. And from here, you repeat. So I'm going to repeat now. I'm going to divide my new first term by x. So I'm going to divide 1x by x. Here, since the x's are exactly the same, they cancel. So I'm left with 1. So I'm going to put a positive 1 in my answer. My next step would be to multiply that 1 by the x minus 3. So I get x minus 3. When you write that underneath your long division, remember you're subtracting, so you change signs. So instead of x minus 3, it's going to be negative x plus 3. Here I can put an imaginary 1. Here both cancel, so you're left with 0. Since there's nothing left to bring down, 0 would be our remainder. When you have a remainder of 0, you don't have to write it in your answer. So our answer is the part that's there on the top, the 2x plus 1. So just to summarize, when you did it, you start by dividing your first terms. Whatever you get when you divide your first terms is part of your answer. After you write that in your answer, you're going to multiply it by the part you use when you multiply, which here is the x minus 3 for the whole problem. Whatever you get when you multiply, you write under the long division and change signs to subtract. After you do that, you're just repeating with your new first term the steps. So here we're going to look at another example. This time we're dividing m squared minus 3m minus 7 by m plus 2. I'm going to start by dividing my first terms, which are m squared and m. Remember, when you divide, you subtract exponents, so 2 minus 1 would be an imaginary 1. So I just get m that goes on top of my long division because it's part of my answer. So after you divide, your next step is to multiply. So I'm going to multiply m. Remember, we're using this when we multiply by the m plus 2. So I get m squared plus 2m. When I write that underneath my long division, I change the signs. So negative m squared minus 2. Negative 3, negative 2 would be negative 5m. And I can bring down my minus 7. And now I'm going to repeat. So my new first term is negative 5m. And I'm going to divide that by m. Here, since the m's are the same, 1 minus 1 would be 0. They cancel. So you're left with negative 5. That's part of your answer. Now I'm going to take my negative 5 and multiply it by that m plus 2. Remember, we're using that m plus 2 anytime we multiply. So I get negative 5m minus 10. I'm going to write that under the long division, but because I'm subtracting, I change my signs. So here this cancels, and my remainder, since there's nothing left to bring down, would be a 3. Your remainder is going to be part of your answer. So when we write our answer, we're going to include that 3. So I have m minus 5 is my answer. But then I have a positive 3, so I'm going to put positive. But your remainder, you write it as a fraction. So I have 3 over m plus 2. Your denominator is always what you were dividing by in the original problem. This next problem is going to be a little different. So we have p cubed minus 6. If you try to divide this, it's going to look a little off because they skipped a few terms here. So normally after cubed would be squared. So you want to make sure that it's written in the correct form. So after p cubed would usually be p squared. Since there's no p squared here, I'm going to use a 0 as a placeholder. And then after p squared would be p. Since there's no p here, I'm going to use a 0 as a placeholder. Then I would put my minus 6. You only do this when they skip terms. So like if you have x squared minus 10, they skipped the x in the middle. So you're just adding the terms that they skip. So I'm going to divide this by p minus 1. These are called zero placeholders, and it's just to make sure that your like terms are aligned when you're completing your problem. So now I'm going to divide my first terms, p cubed and p. That comes out to p squared. Notice, since I put the placeholder there, I know where to put the p squared. And then I can multiply p squared by p minus 1. That's going to be p cubed minus p squared. When I write that underneath, I change the signs. Now I'm bringing down my 0p. Again, that's why that placeholder was important. So now my new first term is 1p squared. I can divide that by p to the imaginary 1. So I get 1p. I'm going to put a positive 1p in my answer. And then I can multiply 1p times p minus 1. It's going to give me 1p squared minus 1p. Remember to change the signs. Now I can bring down the minus 6. So my new first term is a 1p. And I'm going to divide that by p. Here my p's cancel. So I'm left with a positive 1. And then I can do 1 times p minus 1. That just stays p minus 1. Here I would write negative p plus 1. So my remainder for this problem is going to be a negative 5 because there's nothing else to bring down. Remember, you want to write your remainder in your answer. So when I write my answer, I have the p squared plus p plus 1. But I need to put that negative 5, so I'm going to put a minus. Your remainder is always written as a fraction. So I'm going to put that 5 on top, and then that p minus 1 that we were dividing by in the original problem is going to be my denominator. Here in this last problem, we're going to divide 2x cubed minus 5x squared plus 4x minus 4 by x minus 2. So I'm going to start by dividing 2x cubed by x. That comes out to 2x squared. Then I can multiply my 2x squared by x minus 2. That gives me 2x cubed minus 4x squared. Don't forget to change the signs. So right now I get negative 1x squared. I can bring down my 4x. And I repeat. So I'm going to divide negative 1x squared by x. It's imaginary 1. This comes out to negative 1x, which goes in my answer. And I can multiply negative 1x by x minus 2. That comes out to negative 1x squared plus 2x. Here I remember to change the signs. So I get 2x, and I can bring down my minus 4. And I'm going to repeat one more time. So now I can divide 2x by x. Here the x's cancel. And I have a positive 2 that I'm going to write in my answer. 2 times x minus 2 comes out to 2x minus 4. So I change signs. So I have negative 2x plus 4. Here both cancel. So my remainder is 0. So for this one, I don't have to write that remainder in my answer since it's 0. So the answer would just be the 2x squared minus x plus 2. These do have a lot of steps, but they are repetitive. So just make sure you're referring to this when you're doing your problems. Again, the steps are here. You always start by dividing those first terms. Whatever you get, write it in your answer. Then you're going to multiply it by whatever you were dividing by. Make sure whatever you get when you multiply, you want to subtract it from the long division. You do so by changing the signs and then combining like terms. then bring down, and repeat these steps until you have nothing left to bring down. If there is a remainder, remember you're going to write it in your answer as a fraction. Remainder goes on top. Whatever you're dividing by will go on the denominator on the bottom.